There is something curious about success that almost no one notices at the beginning of the journey. People usually believe that what separates those who prosper from those who remain in the same place are external factors: luck, connections, opportunities, starting capital. But one of the richest men in history thought in a completely different way. Andrew Carnegie believed that the real delay in people's lives did not come from a lack of opportunities. It came from an invisible habit, a silent habit, a habit so common that millions of people practice it every single day without realizing it. And this habit has the power to delay years, sometimes decades, of a person's potential. Carnegie noticed this very early in his life. Before he became a steel magnate, before he built an enormous fortune, before he funded thousands of libraries around the world, he was just a poor young immigrant working simple jobs. But there was something he did differently from most people around him. He observed. He observed how successful men thought. He observed how they made decisions. He observed how they dealt with difficulties. And during this process, he realized something unsettling. Many people do not fail because they lack ability. They fail because of small mental patterns repeated every day. Patterns that are almost invisible, but extremely powerful over time. And among all these patterns, Carnegie identified one that appeared with alarming frequency: the tendency to postpone one's own growth. Not consciously, but through a very specific behavior: the constant wait for the perfect moment. This is the invisible habit. The idea that it's not the right time yet, that something is still missing, that we are not ready yet, that maybe it's better to wait a little longer. Wait to have more knowledge. Wait to have more money. Wait to feel more secure. Wait to have more clarity. And while the mind creates these seemingly reasonable justifications, life continues moving forward. Carnegie used to say that there is a fundamental difference between preparation and postponement. Preparation builds capacity. Postponement creates paralysis. But on the surface, the two look very similar. Both involve thinking, planning, analyzing, considering possibilities. The difference lies in one simple detail. Preparation leads to action. Postponement leads to more waiting. And many people live trapped in this cycle without realizing it. They spend years planning a future that never begins, because there is always something else that needs to be solved first. One more course, one more plan, one more ideal moment. But Carnegie discovered something important by observing entrepreneurs and inventors of his time. The people who truly transformed their lives rarely waited until they felt completely ready. In fact, they started before that. They started with uncertainty. They started with fear. They started with doubts. But they started because they understood a truth that few people accept. Clarity rarely appears before movement. It appears during movement. While someone remains still waiting for absolute confidence, the mind continues feeding the same doubts. But when a person begins to act, something changes. They learn. They adjust. They discover things they would never have realized just by thinking. Carnegie said that the world rewards people who enter the game, not those who spend their entire lives studying the rules. And this invisible habit of waiting too long creates another silent effect. It reduces confidence. Because the more time someone spends imagining possible problems, the more the brain begins to believe they are inevitable. The human mind has a natural tendency to amplify risks when it is not involved in action. But when a person begins to act, this perception changes. Problems stop being imaginary monsters and become concrete challenges. Challenges that can be solved. Little by little, confidence stops being a theoretical feeling and becomes something built through experience. Carnegie believed that true confidence is not born from the absence of fear. It is born from the repetition of small victories. And those victories only appear when someone decides to act despite uncertainty. There is also another interesting aspect of this invisible habit. It often disguises itself as prudence. Many people tell themselves they are simply being careful, that they are just waiting for the right moment. But Carnegie asked a simple question. If the right moment never arrives, perhaps the problem is not the moment. Perhaps the problem is the habit of waiting. And this constant waiting creates an extremely powerful cumulative effect. 1 year of postponement may seem small, But when this pattern repeats for 5, 10, or 20 years, the impact becomes enormous. Carnegie said that life rarely changes dramatically in a single day. It changes slowly, through small decisions repeated over time. And one of the most important decisions someone can make is to stop waiting for perfect conditions, because they almost never exist. Even the most successful entrepreneurs Carnegie met faced constant uncertainty, unstable markets, economic crises, competition, unexpected changes. If they had waited for absolute security, they probably would never have started. But there was something that set them apart. They understood that action generates learning. Learning generates adaptation, and adaptation generates progress. While many people wait for confidence to act, others act to build confidence. And this small difference in approach can determine completely different life trajectories over time. Carnegie also observed that the habit of waiting too long often comes from a deep fear of making mistakes. But this fear contains a curious paradox. People try to avoid mistakes by remaining still. Yet remaining still also produces results. Results that are often far more limiting than any mistake made during action. Because mistakes can be corrected. Experiences can be adjusted. But missed opportunities rarely return in exactly the same form. Carnegie said that the world largely belongs to those who move, not to those who watch from a distance. And this principle does not apply only to business. It applies to learning, to creativity, to leadership, to life as a whole. The question then becomes inevitable. How many opportunities in your life have been postponed because of this invisible habit? How many ideas remained only in the realm of possibility? How many projects were pushed into an undefined future? Carnegie believed that one of the greatest shifts a person can make in their mindset is simple. Replace the question, "What if it goes wrong?" with another question. What if I learned something that could change everything? Because every attempt contains information. Every experience contains learning. Every movement creates new possibilities. And over time, this accumulation of learning transforms into something extremely powerful. Capability. The ability to see opportunities more quickly. The ability to make better decisions. The ability to navigate uncertainty with greater calm. But this capability only develops in a specific environment. The environment of action. Carnegie said that many people underestimate the psychological impact of simply starting. The first step creates momentum. The second step reduces fear. The third step begins to build confidence. And before the person realizes it, what seemed impossible months earlier begins to look like just part of the process. So perhaps the most important question is not whether you are ready. But there is an even deeper detail in this story. Because stopping the habit of waiting for the perfect moment is not only an external decision. It is an internal transformation. Andrew Carnegie used to say that the greatest obstacle someone faces is rarely in the world. It is in the mind itself. The human mind has a curious self-protection mechanism. It tries to avoid discomfort, avoid risk, avoid unfamiliar situations. And because of this, whenever an opportunity appears that requires growth, the brain creates reasons to postpone it. Those reasons often sound very convincing. Now is not the right time. I need to learn more first. Maybe I should wait a little longer. I'll start when I'm more prepared. At first glance, these phrases sound prudent. But when they repeat for a long time, they become a kind of invisible prison. A prison built by seemingly logical thoughts. Carnegie observed that many people live inside this prison for years. Some spend their entire lives there. And the most curious part is that, from the outside, it looks like they are simply being careful. But in reality, they are avoiding the discomfort required for growth. Because all growth requires crossing a zone of uncertainty. Whenever someone begins something new, there are unanswered questions. There is risk. There is the possibility of mistakes. There is the chance that the result will not be perfect. But Carnegie realized something fundamental. Success rarely belongs to those who avoid this territory. It belongs to those who learn how to walk through it. While some people wait to feel secure before acting, others act in order to build security. This difference seems small, but over time, it completely changes the trajectory of a life. Think about two different paths. In the first path, a person spends years waiting to feel complete confidence before trying something new. They analyze possibilities, observe what others are doing, plan, imagine, refine ideas, but they rarely execute. In the second path, the person accepts that confidence will come after the beginning. They start small. They learn while moving forward. They correct the direction when necessary. And little by little, they build something real. After 5 years, these two trajectories produce very different results. After 10 years, the difference becomes enormous. Carnegie used to say that time is a silent amplifier. It amplifies decisions. It amplifies habits. It amplifies mentalities. Small choices repeated every day eventually shape a person's destiny. And the habit of waiting too long, when repeated constantly, can delay dreams that could have begun much earlier. But there is another interesting aspect that Carnegie also observed. Many people believe they must first become more confident before they act. But reality usually works in the opposite direction. Confidence is born from action, not from waiting. Each small successful attempt creates a new mental reference. Each challenge overcome strengthens the perception of capability. Each corrected mistake increases the ability to deal with the unexpected. And little by little, the person begins to notice something surprising. What once felt frightening begins to feel familiar. What once seemed impossible begins to look merely difficult. And what once seemed distant begins to feel achievable. Carnegie believed that this process of mental expansion is one of the most powerful forces in life. Because when someone discovers that they are capable of learning, adapting, and evolving, fear begins to lose its power. But there is an important point here. This process never begins inside the comfort zone. It begins with the first step outside of it. And that first step almost always seems small. Too small to appear important. It might be an idea finally put into practice. It might be a decision that had been postponed for a long time. It might be a conversation that finally begins. It might be a project that finally leaves the paper. What is interesting is that, when looking back, many people realize that enormous changes began with very simple movements. Carnegie often said that the world rarely rewards perfection. It rewards movement. Imperfect ideas put into action often produce better results than brilliant ideas that never leave the mind. Because movement generates something extremely valuable. Feedback. Reality begins to respond. New information appears. New opportunities emerge. And the person begins to operate at a completely different level of learning. While someone who remains only in the realm of ideas lives in a world of hypotheses. Those who act enter the world of experience. And experience is one of the most powerful forms of knowledge. But perhaps the most important observation Andrew Carnegie left about this subject is the following. The habit of waiting for the perfect moment is not only a delay, it also creates regret. Because over the years, many people begin to realize how many opportunities they let pass. How many projects could have started? How many ideas could have been tested? How many versions of themselves could have been discovered? And in that moment, an inevitable question appears. What if I had started earlier? This question appears frequently in the lives of those who spent too long waiting. But Carnegie believed there is a simple way to avoid this kind of regret. Make decisions based on learning, not fear. Instead of asking, what if it goes wrong? Ask, what can I learn by trying? Because even when something does not work exactly as planned, the learning gained is rarely lost. It accumulates. And over time, this accumulation creates something extremely powerful. Vision. The vision to see opportunities that others do not notice. The vision to identify paths that once seemed invisible. And this vision rarely appears instantly. It is born from practice, from experience, from constant movement. For this reason, perhaps the greatest lesson from Andrew Carnegie's philosophy is extremely simple. Life rarely requires you to be completely ready. It only requires you to be willing to begin. Because the invisible habit that delays so many lives is not the lack of talent. It is not the lack of intelligence. It is not the lack of opportunities. It is simply the silent decision to wait a little longer. Wait another week, another month, another year. And before we realize it, entire years have passed. But the good news is that this habit can also be broken with an equally silent decision. The decision to begin now. Even if there are still doubts. Even if there are still unanswered questions. Even if the path is not completely clear. Because, as Carnegie deeply believed, progress rarely begins with absolute certainty. It begins with enough courage to take the first step. But there is still another aspect of this invisible habit that almost no one notices. Because it doesn't appear only when someone has a big decision to make. It also appears in the small choices of everyday life. Andrew Carnegie observed that most people imagine that life changes only through major events. A big opportunity, a big investment, a big decision. But reality usually works in a much quieter way. Life changes through small actions repeated over time. And it is exactly at this invisible level that the habit of postponing begins to create impact. It appears when someone decides to leave something important for tomorrow. When someone avoids starting something that seems difficult. When someone chooses immediate comfort instead of gradual progress. These decisions seem small, almost insignificant. But when they accumulate over months and years, they shape the entire direction of a life. Carnegie said that there is a huge difference between intention and execution. Many people have good intentions. They want to learn. They want to improve. They want to grow. They want to build something meaningful. But intention by itself does not change reality. What changes reality is consistent execution. And here another habit appears that often accompanies the first. The tendency to overestimate what we can accomplish in a single day. And underestimate what we can build over several years. This pattern creates a silent frustration. A person starts a project expecting quick results. When they don't appear immediately, motivation fades. So they stop. After some time, they try again. Then stop again. And so they enter a cycle of beginnings and interruptions. Carnegie realized that people who truly transformed their lives operated differently. They were not waiting for bursts of motivation. They were building consistency, even when progress seemed slow, even when results were not yet visible, because they understood something that few people realize. Real progress rarely looks impressive at the beginning. It looks small, almost imperceptible. But when small improvements accumulate over months and years, the final result can be extraordinary. Imagine someone who decides to learn a new skill. If that person studies for only a few hours on a single day, the impact will be small. But if they study a little every day for years, the level of mastery they achieve can be completely different. The same is true for business, relationships, health, creativity, leadership. Everything that grows in a solid way usually follows the same pattern. Small steps, repeated consistently. And here is something interesting that Carnegie observed about the human mind. We tend to ignore the power of these small actions because they do not produce dramatic results immediately. But time transforms small actions into major changes. And this is one of the reasons why the habit of waiting can be so harmful. It interrupts this cumulative process. Every time someone decides to postpone the beginning of something important, they are also postponing all the benefits that could have emerged over time. Carnegie used to say that the best moment to start something important almost always feels imperfect. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be things we still don't know. There will always be risks. But there is also something that many people forget. Learning does not happen before the journey. It happens during the journey. While someone remains still trying to predict every possible scenario, reality continues to change, and many opportunities appear only to those who are already in motion. This explains why some people seem to have luck. In reality, many times it is not luck. It is movement. People in motion meet more people, explore more ideas, experiment with more paths, and as a result, drastically increase their chances of finding real opportunities. Meanwhile, those who remain waiting tend to watch those opportunities pass by. Carnegie also observed that most of the great achievements in history began in an extremely modest way. Almost all of them started as a simple idea, a small attempt, an initial experiment. But those attempts had something in common. They were put into action. And when something is put into action, it enters a process of evolution. Ideas evolve, projects evolve, people evolve, but nothing evolves while it remains only in the realm of intentions. There is a phrase often attributed to Carnegie that reflects this mindset well. He said that the world more often rewards people who act imperfectly than those who wait for perfection. Because action creates reality, and reality creates learning, and learning creates growth. Perhaps that is why many of the people who advance the most in life are not necessarily the most talented. They are simply the ones who developed a different habit. The habit of starting, of trying, of adjusting, of continuing, even when the path is not yet completely clear. And over time, this simple habit produces something extremely powerful: momentum. Momentum is that force that begins small, but becomes stronger as movement continues. At first, each step requires conscious effort. But after some time, progress begins to gain rhythm. Opportunities start appearing more frequently. Skills begin to develop. Connections begin to emerge. And what seemed slow at the beginning begins to accelerate. But all of this depends on one single starting point: the first step. And perhaps this is the most important question you can ask yourself right now. What is the first step you are avoiding? Because often it is not necessary to change everything at once. It is not necessary to have all the answers. It is not necessary to see the entire path. Sometimes all life asks for is a small movement in the right direction. And that small movement can be the beginning of a transformation much greater than you imagine. Because when someone decides to break the habit of waiting, they also begin to build the habit of moving forward. And this new habit, repeated day after day, can become the force that finally accelerates a life that once seemed stuck.